Welcome to the Times of Israel's The Daily Briefing. Today is Monday, March 23rd. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here in our Jerusalem studio with diplomatic correspondent Lazar Berman. Lazar, thank you so much for joining me today, as always.
Happy to be here, as always.
Thank you so much. And today we are facing a deadline in this evening in which U.S. President Donald Trump said to Iran that the Strait of Hormuz must be opened. So Lazar will dive in and tell us what this means if this deadline comes and passes. We're also going to zoom out and talk about the war 3 weeks on. And then in the second half of the program, we're going to discuss an impending ground operation in Lebanon. All of this and more when we're back. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here in our Jerusalem studio with diplomatic correspondent Lazar Berman. Lazar, today we are facing a deadline in which U.S. President Donald Trump told Iran that the Strait of Hormuz, which to remind our listeners is the conduit from which about 20% of the world's energy passes, that the Strait of Hormuz must be open for commercial travel. So Lazar, what could happen if Iran decides to not heed the warning?
So I think we can assume that Iran is not going to heed the warning. They've certainly, everything that they've said and done in the last day and a half, this went out on Saturday, we're here on Monday, has indicated that they have no intention of listening to Trump. They've been quite defiant, and they've even threatened that if Trump follows through on with his threats and strikes Iran's energy infrastructure and its energy plants, then they are going to hit Gulf energy facilities, and they've even laid some of them out. That would obviously make energy prices go higher, which is exactly why Iran is doing it. This is their strategy for the war. This is really the only card they have left to play, which is to make, and this is what they've done throughout the war, try to make it so costly for the world and for the U.S. voter that pressure is put on Trump to stop the war. They know that they're not going to be able to convince the Israeli people to rise up and stop the war. I think that's significant. If the Iranian axis used to think of the Israeli society as, fragile as a spider web, now they understand there's nothing they can do to make us want to stop. Indeed, polls show that Israelis want to keep going until the Iranian regime falls.
And the Arab states as well, correct? The Gulf states.
Well, there's no polls there. There's reports that quietly these leaders are telling Trump to keep going because once this threat happens, or once this threat was actually made real, and they see how serious Iran was about bringing them into the conflict, even though they weren't attacking, that they say we cannot live under this threat anymore. We'll never go back to normal. Our economies will never get back to what it was. People will not want to invest in here. We need to destroy this threat for the long term. So it would seem that the Iranian strategy is not working so far, if indeed the Gulf states are telling Trump to keep going. That's exactly what they don't want. But this is their last card to play. We'll see if this is a real deadline from Trump. We've seen Trump give actual deadlines. If you remember, ahead of the June war between Israel and Iran, that came after a Trump 60-day deadline. And then I think it was the next day Israel started its war. But Trump has also given repeated deadlines to Hamas and Gaza.
2 weeks.
Right. And then hell will break loose. Hell has not broken loose, and they still hold on to their weapons. And it's not something that people are paying attention to enough right now, but certainly Hamas is using this to strengthen and deepen its control over almost every Gazan. So that's what we're going to look for tonight. It'll be about 2 a.m. Israel time when this deadline passes, and then we'll see. What we can see, that just from the troop movement is that there are new troops coming into the region, and it's significant because there's 2 sets of Marine expeditionary forces coming in, and these are troops that are in their DNA. And why there are Marines and not, say, regular army is that they can do landing operations. They're very flexible. They can take over islands. They can hold on to beach areas, and they can also protect themselves doing that and deal with drones and missiles and things.
I think it's not coincidental that you mentioned island, correct? Because we're talking about Harg Island.
Yeah, it's one of the major islands. I think over 80% of maybe 70% of Iran's energy comes out through that island. So there is a possibility that the U.S. could take that island and then really handicapped Iran's ability to export oil. But I should note that Trump has removed some of the blocks on Iran's ability to export oil right now because they want that to go to the market. So it's this weird situation where uh, we are pressuring Iran in 1,000 different ways, but its main economic lifeline, they're still leaving that open for a bit. I assume that'll change if they get the Strait of Hormuz to open. There's also a diplomatic angle here. How many other states will join up to this defensive effort? You've heard, I think it's 22 states now that said they're willing to take part in it, but they haven't said exactly what and whether they're willing to commit troops or whatever it is. So right now it looks like it's going to be a U.S. operation. I am positive that the Americans are not just thinking of this right now. Like, oh, oops, we forgot the Strait of Hormuz is serious. This is U.S. Central Command. It's run by an admiral, Admiral Brad Cooper, who used to be stationed in Bahrain. He has paid attention to the Strait of Hormuz a decade, probably more, right? And he's a Navy guy. This is all they think about. And in the planning to the war, there's no way that the very serious people in the Pentagon and other places were not coming up. It was obvious that Iran was doing this, so coming up with plans to break it open. It doesn't mean it's guaranteed that it's going to work, but that is the next phase of the war that we're looking at.
It's interesting that you talked about other nations that could be joining up because recently, I think it was last night, in fact, US President Donald Trump essentially launched a mocking effort towards UK Premier Keir Starmer. He sent out this video that was basically mocking the prime minister. And so how do you see the UK in terms of its effort? It is allowing for some use of bases in the meantime, but it appears that Trump is doing a really, I don't know, psychological experiment with Starmer in terms of his readiness to fight.
Yeah. So Starmer, I mean, the UK has traditionally been a staunch U.S. ally militarily. So if you look at Iraq, that was led along with the U.S., but by Tony Blair. Afghanistan, obviously, and a lot of other places. Keir Starmer, not seen as the most charismatic or strongest leader, seen as someone who's very kind of dry and legalistic. And indeed, at the beginning, he was making his argument not on strategy, but on legal, we have to see what's legal, what's allowed, which is a strange way to make strategies. Usually you have your goals and how the means to achieve them, and then you want to make sure, then you check and make sure that that falls into whatever treaties and laws are relevant. But the British base zones on Cyprus have been targeted. Diego Garcia, obviously, and it looks like they and other countries are slowly getting dragged into this, but they're trying at every step. They're trying to take a step forward and make sure that they're leaving a step out of this. So that's where they are right now. They're saying that they're willing to do. To be involved in some way, to now let the U.S. use their bases, which they didn't initially. They're very involved in the RAF is very involved in defensive efforts, and they have been throughout. But in terms of offensive efforts and committing troops to a Strait of Hormuz operation, we're not there yet.
Okay, but at the same time, US President Donald Trump is openly mocking the prime minister, which is an interesting tactic if you want some kind of partnership. And I want to put it into our context with Israel. And we've heard so often that the US president wasn't aware that Israel was going to bomb X or was going to attack X. And then behind the scenes, we hear again, no, the US president was aware. We informed him of everything. So it's an interesting outward presentation that Trump is presenting to the world. And why do you think this is happening?
In terms of the UK?
No, in terms of the UK, in terms of any kind of partner that he's trying to.
No, well, with Israel, he's been anything he says about Israel. 99% of what he says about Israel is wonderful. That this is the ally or they've called him the model ally. Not only Trump, but Hegseth and maybe even Vance, but certainly Hegseth said that that this is an ally that is very competent, is willing to defend itself, is willing to be a full partner. We know who Trump is. He can be very critical of a world leader at one time, and then can switch, or after a conversation or in person, he can be very complimentary. We even saw that with Zoran Mamdani, right? Not someone who agrees with him on anything, but when they were in person, Trump was very, very warm to him. But I think he is frustrated with most of the Europeans, certainly with the British, and that's why this is coming out in that way. Ultimately, interest will win out, right? So there's domestic interests, political interests, But there's also the global interests, and I'm sure the British are trying to weigh those right now. Um, it's not popular in the UK. The UK doesn't want to see themselves. It very much feels like Iraq in many ways, right? That they're getting dragged by an irresponsible U.S. president. So he has to balance all of those things. But domestic electoral politics tend to have a very, very heavy role in these type of decisions.
We're hearing from the IDF that the war is potentially at its halfway mark. Have you heard reports of this nature as well?
I don't pay attention to those because A, they don't know, and we don't. No one knows, right? Uh, a thousand things could happen, right? There could be an Iranian success that makes us have to change. The Americans could change what they want to do, either shorten or lengthen it. Um, it seems like the strategy again is shifting, or the focus of the war is shifting to the Strait of Hormuz right now, so that could take a long time. There were reports last night that U.S. officials are telling the Israelis that this Hormuz operation will take weeks, and therefore the war will go on as long as is necessary. So if people are desperate to know a deadline, what wars have deadlines, right? Even that shorter June war only ended after 12 days because Trump decided that that was it. Israel wanted to keep going. So it's not a way I think about it. I think we can say safely that there are going to be several more weeks of this. This could extend even longer. Important things have been done, but obviously there's much to be done. The regime continues to be stable. No one's rising up. So if that is the ultimate goal that Israel has, which has not been the stated goal, then this will take more time.
And do you think that as the war continues, that the Arab Gulf states will join up and actually be more offensive versus defensive?
It's hard to imagine. I think the thing that would happen would have to be a major strike on their energy and their oil facilities, and they understand that there are no limits here. Because what they're trying to do right now is the same strategy as in the past. They are trying to show Iran that they are not a threat and that they're willing to be open to dialogue. So it took a while for a lot of states to even kick out military attaches and diplomats. And to let Israel and America do the military side, well, they try to reduce the threats to themselves by maintaining or expanding dialogue. That's still what they're mostly doing. So it would take a major, groundbreaking, game changer, whether it hits Aramco facilities or really takes out some of their central facilities, and then they'll say, okay, this is enough. There's no limits on what Iran will do to us, so now we're going to get in. But again, their capabilities are not very significant. But it'll be more the symbolic idea of that these Arab states are joining into the U.S., but also an Israeli effort that's very significant.
Okay, so let's take it one more hypothetical farther. And if the Arab states were to join up, do you think that Russia would join up with Iran at that point?
No, I really don't. First of all, Russia has its hands full in Ukraine. It can't even win that war. It doesn't really have a lot of excess capacity for adventures, certainly not against the U.S., right? It has no interest of getting into a fight with the U.S., which is going to lose. Its ability to project force in the Middle East is not very good, right? We remember they were effective in Syria because it didn't take that much. But even at the same time, Israel was endlessly more powerful in terms of our capabilities in the region than Russia ever was. So we saw what Russia can't do on its doorstep in a war that it was preparing for. It never gained air superiority over Ukraine. Given that Israel gained air superiority alone over Tehran, Russia is not going to introduce its planes into that environment. If this went on, or if there's going to be another round in the future, maybe they'll sell them some stuff, but they need their own stuff as well. So I have very little concern that Russia is going to get involved in a war that the U.S. is fighting.
We're going to discuss the rest of the war, Lebanon, after the break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here in our Jerusalem studio with diplomatic correspondent Lazar Berman. Listeners, you may have noticed a bit of an abrupt ending because we were all called to our bomb shelter, which in this case is a very, very heavily concrete stairwell. So please bear with us as we start our second half. Now, Lazar, let's talk about Lebanon. And we did actually hear that one Iranian missile hit Lebanon. I think all assessments are stating that it was a mistake, but But in the meantime, Hezbollah has been really pummeling Israel's north, and also one missile, I think it was a Scud missile, hit close to the Gaza envelope area, which is of note, but let's put that to the side. There are a lot of indications that the IDF is planning a pretty major ground operation. Last week, we reported that it started a targeted ground operation. So, how are you seeing what's happening in the north right now?
Sure. So we haven't started the big operation at all. I think it's inevitable. The only way that it wouldn't happen would be if the Lebanese government would deal with the Hezbollah threat. I think it was a very senior military official who said in Lebanon who said that they're not going to fight with Hezbollah. It doesn't surprise Israel. It doesn't surprise anybody. The Lebanese army, even if it wanted to, wouldn't be able to. It's certainly not as capable as Hezbollah, and it's not even sure that it wants to. This is an anti-Hezbollah government, but they're very limited in what they can do. So it's going to fall on Israel. I think Israel is surprised by the fact that Hezbollah so eagerly entered this war. They certainly got beat pretty hard back in 2024. It looks like Iran succeeded in building them up or getting them ready for another round against Israel, which should be a warning light for us that if we don't finish these groups off, there's no way to prevent rebuilding. You could slow it down. That's what Israel was trying to do for years with the Mabam campaign, the campaign between wars. But there's really no way to stop your enemy from building up over time. So that's where we are. The question is how far Israel will want to go and when it will happen. If I had to guess, I would say it seems like it's going to happen after whenever the Iran thing ends. Iran war thing, then
That Iran war thing.
yeah, then Israel will be able to put its full attention to the north. Obviously, the Iran war doesn't take any ground troops, but ground troops in Lebanon need air cover. And though Israel could do it now, it's certainly better if it doesn't have to split its air force up too much. There's also the issue of weather. You can do a lot of strategic bombing when the weather is cloudy. I would say it isn't good. I like this weather, but when it's cloudy and raining, it's hard to do close air support. So do tactical support to support the ground troops. And I would imagine that Israel has no problem waiting a little bit. No one's going to stop them from going into Lebanon. It's just a question of when. I think the political will is there, and I think there's the understanding that they're not going to evacuate the north again. So that there's no other option other than a significant ground operation. Right now, what they're doing is making sure that there are IDF troops in between Hezbollah and all the civilians in the north, improving their positions, destroying some more infrastructure, setting the ground for the ground maneuver, but it hasn't started yet.
Right. And as our military correspondent, Emmanuel Fabian, noted yesterday, most of the attacks from Hezbollah have been on the IDF troops. 7 were wounded yesterday up in the north, unrelatedly to Hezbollah, I believe. But anytime you have troops stationed and inactive, it is a recipe for disaster, as we saw in Gaza as well, that there were increased accidents and, unfortunately, friendly fire incidents. So do you think that the troops will be stationed and ready for the next week of poor weather, or I would call it poor weather, Lazar, in the north, rain, cold?
They're not sitting around. They're operating, but the logic of the operation is not to drive deep into Lebanon right now and to take up to the Litani. It's to do more work on the couple of ridges that are just over the border. There's not a lot of Hezbollah there, but I think it's pretty obvious that some fighters have crossed the Litani and have moved into southern Lebanon, but they're also able to hit northern Israel from beyond southern Lebanon in terms of some of the longer range missiles. So this by no means will, if Israel takes everything up to the Litani, which they've done in the past, this will by no means stop the threat, but it will help with a lot of the threats. The big question is, okay, so how do we keep this from happening again and again? If the Iranian regime falls, that makes our work much easier because then probably Hezbollah kind of withers on the vine, and that's that. If the Iranian regime doesn't fall, then you have to think, okay, is there any sort of international effort that can support the Lebanese government in disarming Hezbollah? Not that likely, and then we might be here again in a couple of years.
But just pause on that for 1 second, because the ceasefire that was negotiated in November 2024 did involve some kind of international
Yeah,
effort. The US and France were involved there.
yeah, yeah. So that's my point. And even with that, here we are again.
Right.
So then you have to ask, are we headed toward another buffer zone, which is like the security zone from 85 to 2000, which would make sense immediately now, but then you're setting yourself up for guerrilla warfare and a long-term occupation of southern Lebanon again. I don't think that's something that's very good either. So there are some very big questions here. Even though the ground operation certainly makes sense, it certainly has its logic. It's something that Israel seems to be forced into, even though there's a lot of people that say, okay, we know we didn't finish the job. This is our opportunity to. But
I heard one report, Lazar, that I wanted to ask you about, and a report stating that potentially the IDF could work through Syria and to create kind of a pincher move into Lebanon to get to Hezbollah. Now, obviously, Israel and Syria do not have relations, and Israel is stationed in, I think, 5 points in Syria. Correct me if I'm
the
wrong.
5 points are Lebanon. But
5 points are Lebanon.
Israel has a buffer zone in Syria still, for
Okay.
sure.
So do you see this as some kind of a potential maneuver, especially if you add into the equation that the U.S. does have good relations with Syria? Is it potentially possible that the IDF could maneuver through Syria?
It's interesting because Syria was always concerned that Israel would go through Lebanon to get around their defenses, which is why they occupied a lot of Lebanon for a long time. Does Israel need to do that? No, they can go wherever they want in Lebanon. Hezbollah can't do anything to stop them. Would it be a way to add a surprise element? Sure.
I guess not if we're talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, but there's not that much that Hezbollah could do. They can't stop Israeli maneuver. They can try to inflict casualties. That's about it. Yeah, things like coming from the sea or dropping from helicopters, those are easier. I wouldn't say it's that likely that we're going to push through Syria and go around, but it's an interesting option. I hadn't thought about it.
Wow, I stumped the man who knows everything. So we're going to end here. And again, listeners, we are working under sirens, and you heard that live from within this very recording. So thank you so much for joining me today, Lazar.
Good to be here, as always.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced and edited by Yitzhak Ledei. Until tomorrow, shalom.
On Sunday, March 22nd, 2 large ballistic missiles slammed into the southern cities of Dimona and Arad. Together, over 175 people were injured, making this the largest mass casualty event of this war to date. The next morning, I traveled down to both impact sites to speak with Dean Elsdoon, the international spokesperson for the police, to get a better understanding of what happened. I'm Eli Katzoff, video reporter for the Times of Israel.
What happened here last night?
So we got 2 barrages of Iranian ballistic missiles targeting once again our residential communities. The first one in Dimona and the second one here in Arad. The missile itself landed right in between these buildings, causing severe damage to the infrastructure. Upwards of 88 civilians, including children, were medically evacuated here.
Were there missile fragments let, like unexploded devices here in this area?
Here specifically, none of them were the missile itself exploded. You could see the result of the blast. But our first responders from the Israel police, specifically the EOD, the bomb squads, need to neutralize the fragments because they can contain acid and fuel from the ballistic missile that's still hazardous to breathe in, hazardous to touch. And so we need to clear that so the first responders can go inside of these buildings.
When you come to a scene like this, what are the things you're seeing here? Can you describe that to us?
So the initial stages are obviously chaos. People don't understand what's taking place. First responders are trying to gather the information, what's impacted. You have people who are initially missing, parents looking for their children. So we have to open up tents so that way we can organize all the information to come in clearly. Even though some of these buildings were under danger of collapsing, our first responders were rushing in, and slowly we start to paint a picture. What took place, who's missing, how many casualties. But our main focus is life-saving operations, getting the civilians out of here and getting those that need medical treatment as quickly as possible to hospitals.
We had to pause the interview for a few moments as the area we were standing in was deemed unsafe due to the risk of the surrounding buildings possibly collapsing. We picked it up a few moments later next to a bombed-out bus across the street.
Can you tell me about the evacuations?
It's multifaceted. We have to then bring in buses here because these people have no home left. We need to find places for them. So here specifically in Arad, we got in touch with the municipality and we've set up locations in the Dead Sea and Jerusalem where now these families need to be evacuated to. But you saw the damage here. There's not really anything for them to take. So they're packing just a few clothes in a backpack, getting onto the bus, and they're gonna be in these hotels for a while.
Do we know what happened to safe?
So here specifically, the safe room is underground with the protected shelters underneath the ground. Many people were able to go. I've spoken with some of the residents that said they felt the boom as if it was inside of the protected shelter with them. Obviously, we're talking about a very heavy warhead here, not a cluster missile like we've seen lately in Tel Aviv or other areas like Jerusalem. But there's no doubt that protected shelters are saving lives, whether it's the mamad, the safe room inside the house, or whether it's the protected shelter underneath ground or the public ones. We've seen time and time again that they're protecting lives.
There are a lot of people that were injured in this blast.
At the end of the day, we obviously need to conduct an assessment to see where people were standing. It's too early to tell you. We haven't spoken with the people. Many of them were medically evacuated to hospitals. We need to discuss with them where they were and everything. But the point of the matter is that you've seen the damage. There was no fatalities here in the initial response, which is a miracle in and of itself. And I think a huge factor in that has to do with people going down to their protected shelters.